Welcome back to Code of Culture. Today, we will explore the open source world and how it may be copying colonialist patterns, even though they have different values. We will introduce some ideas from Slavoj Zizek and Wallerstein, and we will dive into the problems of cultural colonialism in open source industry. Let's kick off. First of all, let me introduce to you Slavoj Zizek. For those who still didn't know Zizek, here he is. Let's begin by considering some of his ideas. He has extensively criticized global capitalism and its ability to adapt and co-opt different movements. While Zizek has not specifically addressed open source, we can apply his ideas to understand how the open source ecosystem, which is known for its values of transparency, collaboration, and inclusivity, could inadvertently empower capitalist structures where dominant players exploit the shared knowledge and resources created by diverse communities. This happens when large corporations co-opt the work of open source contributors without compensating them or giving back to the community. But these ideas also mix with Wallerstein's world system theory. As we saw in the episode about billionaires, his theory highlights the unequal relationships between countries, with wealthier nations benefiting from exploiting poorer ones. We saw how central countries exert power to maintain their position in the world system. In the context of open source, remote work and distributed collaboration contribute to maintaining this unequal power dynamic. For example, companies in developed countries can leverage lower salaries in developing countries without making significant investment in local infrastructure, education, or social programs. With this in mind, let's study some tactics that the companies in core countries use to maintain their position of power. One way to do this is by using English as the default language for open source documentation and communication. Incluso este podcast se hace en inglés, siendo mi lengua materna el español, con el fin de llegar a más gente. This is significant because none of the countries in Latin America, North of Africa, Asia, or the European Union, with the exception of Ireland, English is the mother language. This can create a barrier for non-English speakers, making it more challenging for them to participate and contribute to open source projects. It also limits the diversity of ideas and perspectives that enrich development processes. Another tactic is promoting non-viral licenses. This allows companies to use work created by communities and individual contributors without giving back. This practice can exploit the efforts of open source contributors while further enriching capitalist companies. Viral licenses like GPL require derivative works to be released under the same license, ensuring that improvements are shared with the community. By avoiding viral licenses, capitalist companies build their own products using open source projects without contributing back, undermining the communal spirit of the open source. Additionally, open source conferences and forums often take place in developed countries. Last CNCF events, for example, have been in cities like San Diego, Barcelona, Valencia, Detroit, or Amsterdam. Even if there is an economical support from the organization for some participants, this still makes it difficult for individuals from less privileged backgrounds or developing countries to participate. The high cost of travel, accommodation, and visas can be prohibitive, limiting the voices and experiences represented at these events and leaving them behind in decision processes, in person conversations, and all the knowledge that is shared in these events. And lastly, the platforms that we use in the open source, like GitHub, are, at the end of the day, private companies whose aim is to earn money, and most of them are subject to US laws. This allows GitHub to ban contributors or open source projects from certain countries, like we saw during the war in Ukraine with Russian contributors. However, this has nothing to do with human rights defense, but instead with political and economical reasons. We can see how, at the same time, GitHub is banning individual contributors from countries not aligned with US foreign policies, while putting no restriction and even looking for remote workers in other countries that, even if they violate human rights and oppress minorities, have good relations with the United States. These restrictions create an uneven playing field for open source projects, with some individuals having greater access to resources and knowledge than others due to nationality and geographical and political conditions. And this is important because these practices contradict the original values of the open source and they embrace and promote capitalism. The spirit of the open source is not that. It is about breaking down barriers, sharing knowledge, and fostering collaboration. So, what can we do? Let's explore some alternatives. First, if you are working with open source projects in your company, propose to contribute back with improvements that you have seen or you implemented, especially if the original project is maintained by an individual contributor. Also, be sure to comply with the licenses of the project that you are using. This is especially important in the case of viral licenses. And even more, consider using viral licenses in your project. These will force companies using your code to release the changes that they do and contribute back to your project. Another way to contribute to the decolonization of the open source communities is to be part of your local communities. Join local meetups and look for local projects in your own language. Also, help other people to start contributing to small open source projects by teaching them how to make their first pull requests, explaining them the licenses that they can use, or sharing your own projects with them and inviting them to help you in some simple but engaging tasks. You can do this by organizing workshops in your company or university, mentoring friends and colleagues, creating videos, documents, or in many other ways. As we said, don't be afraid to do it in your mother language, and even better if it is a local dialect. Finally, don't forget about inclusion. One of the objectives of open source is the access to knowledge for everyone. Make sure to include underrepresented collectives and minorities in your project, but not only as mere participants. If we aim for real inclusion, we all have to be part of the organization and have not only a voice, but also a vote. So, to wrap up, it's really important for us to notice and change the hidden colonial patterns in the open source world today. By doing simple things like supporting local projects, being inclusive, and following licenses, we can create a fairer and more diverse open source community. So, guys, let's we, the people, don't fall into the capitalist and colonialist framework. Get involved and make sure that your open source community is truly open and welcoming for everyone, no matter where they come from or who they are. Gracias por acompañarme en este capítulo de Code of Culture.